Welcome back to a new, not only just a new episode of Making the Leap, but a new year of Making the Leap. That's kind of exciting.
How about
2023.
it? Welcome in. Hope you had a great holiday season and a happy new year to you. This is an exciting new year where we look ahead to what we hope will be, some of the themes that we talked about last year, but where we learn new things, and today's show is certainly new. It's yet another kind of a new addition to some of the different educational vehicles that we've explored and discussed on this show over the last few months of 2022. Our hope with this podcast is, while our focus and our thrust is Christian education, there's a lot of the different education vehicles out there.
Right. And I think talking about the idea of school and learning and what that entails and what it means to everybody, because I think it's a personal thing for everybody to kind of identify. So as we go down that route, I'm excited to bring different people with those kinds of ideas.
Just breaking all of us, and I include us in this, and I include me in this, breaking us of this idea that there is but one way to educate. I hope before I'm dead that no longer will we be in a room of people where they go, but what about K through 12 school? And what about college? I hope that is officially stabbed dead before I'm dead in the ground. That should not be the way we talk about educating our kids ever again.
Well, and because we're going to talk today with a gentleman named Matt Beaudreau, who has done something a little bit, I think, different from what has been, we've traditionally talked about, but it was through a listener that went ahead, I think a listener of yours actually, and a little bit of ours, but sent me some information. I started looking at this, and I think drawing those connections and him saying, oh, you talked about this topic, now you need to go over here and start thinking about this. And so, like always, like we've said, sending us these emails at hello@makingtheleap.com, hello@makingtheleappodcast.com is a great way to send us ideas and thoughts and people that you think we should be reaching out to.
So today is not a formally Christian education themed show, but it is a different way of educating our kids. And
and really is biblical at the heart of it, even though that's not what we're talking about.
Which you'll hear. And then he also has an interesting fact. So for both boys and girls, he has an educational vehicle to introduce you to, but also he swerves into mentoring men and young men. Talking about particularly those like our boys' age who are in their late teens. There is a problem in this country with young men, and Matt recognizes it. And so you're going to hear about that program as well. This is a show, I think, it's a show for both boys and girls, but I think those of you with young men in your lives, particularly those of you with young men in your lives where you're frustrated and you're not entirely sure where their future is focused, or if it's focused at all, maybe Matt can help. Well, we got an email from someone who listens to the podcast, and we always love that when people reach out to us and say, hey, there's somebody I think you need to know, you need to meet, and you need to talk to. And it was John from Westchester who emailed us. Yes. And he said, do you know of Matt Beaudreau? And we said, no, we don't, but we should learn more. And as we got to reading about him, we said, yeah, this is a guy we need to read up on and talk to. And so you reached out and he said yes. And first of all, Matt, we're grateful that you're here.
Oh, I'm grateful as well. That's a great introduction right there. Anytime somebody is recommending you, that's high praise, man. So the honor is mine.
No, I know, but it's not our pressure. So it's a listener's pressure. So we don't come to the table with any expectations, but honey, why don't you tell people what he does?
Yes.
Set the man up.
So we are excited to talk with you. I am particularly excited to talk with you because you have done a couple of different things that I think our listeners are going to want to hear about. Number one, you have an education background, which we'll talk more about later. But you're specifically the founder of the Acton Academy schools, along with president of Apogee Strong, which is a program for like a mentorship leadership program for boys ages 12 to 22. So we have a few different avenues to go down and talk with you about, but the school piece was what initially connected you to me via John, which we were so glad about.
But also a speaker and a consultant and a coach in the professional sphere too. So you come at this, you've been a teacher at the collegiate level, private, public, you give corporate talks. So you're sort of a jack of all trades. Is that all on one business card, I guess is my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I got worn out just listening to all the stuff that I got going on, man. I always tell people I'm never hurting for something to do. And are those all separate, businesses? They are. Are they all the same mission though? They are. And that's what makes it so easy, right? Is my entire mission is around building strong young people. And you've got to attack that from a number of different ways. You got to attack it from how do I help the parents? How do I help the young people themselves? How do I set up the environments? Where are they going most? Well, they're going to be going to school campuses and great. So how do I make, an education experience that makes sense? How do I pour into the dads? How do we talk to the organizations that are going to be hiring these young people as they come out, and they're hiring me going, hey, we've got some kids that can play school really well, but gosh, they're struggling here in the workplace, right? So we're attacking it from all different angles, same mission, different angles.
And so that piece of it right there, the school to the business piece, that is a foundational piece of the Acton Academy model, from what I'm understanding. Is that right?
Let's start with what Acton Academy is. Let's just go 30,000 feet and you tell us about it, what it is, how it came to be.
Yeah, so Acton Academy was actually started by Jeff and Laura Sandiford. They started Acton's MBA program first. So they had the MBA program based out of Austin, Texas, and then they had decided they were going to launch something just for their own. It was never meant to be any sort of network, that it's become now. So they wanted to build something for their own two children, and then somebody left the school and had to move, and they said, well, hey, we'd really love to do the same thing here. Could we kind of partner with you, sort of? I was in a position coming out of schools where I'm going, okay, I'm going to build something different for my own kids. And luckily enough, a professor just said, hey, there's a group of people that are kind of talking about doing this, and they're launching these silos. You should check it out. I connected with Jeff and Laura, and we were off and running. So at this point, we've got a network of about 300, give or take a few, entrepreneurial parents, many of them, who have decided, look, I want to do something different for my kids in my community. So we've got about 300 campuses, 25, 26 different countries. I think we're in 41 or 42 different states, and it's not a franchise. It's just a bunch of people who are going, look, we're going to build a better education system, and we're going to do it together. We're going to help each other out along the way. It's been nothing short of magnificent.
This was born out of parents who just decided they wanted an alternative to public education. You happen to be one. These people that you mentioned happen to be a pair. And so you put your experiences together, and now you've created, I think, as you just used the word franchises, this is an opportunity people could not buy into, but start their own. I mean, sort of the, if you want, sort of the McDonald's of private education.
And so I want to be careful with that. It's definitely not so we call it a network, not a franchise, because if you go to McDonald's in China versus McDonald's where you guys are in Missouri, where I am in North Carolina, they all look the same. Well, that's not the case for us, right? We have similar beliefs. We have similar systems, but we know it can't be the same because no two people are the same, no communities are the same, not all the needs are going to be the same. So it's really a network of people helping each other do it the right way, but you can kind of customize based on what you got going on. So
I like that a lot, just as a former teacher myself, and one of the things that we struggled with a lot was the cookie cutter mentality that the one lesson plan I created was going to reach all 25 kids in my class the same way. And any teacher who's been in a classroom knows that is not the case, especially when you start factoring in energy levels, backgrounds, family backgrounds, what they've learned so far coming into my classroom. And so I really was intrigued when I started reading about these different formats that these schools had across the country. I didn't look outside of the United States, but I know that the one I looked at in Missouri, I think it's down south of Missouri, I believe it is literally located inside a lighthouse. I thought that was phenomenal because it just brought a whole new dynamic to a whole new dimension, I guess, to what education can be.
Well, of course. And so that's what I always talk about too with people is say, one of the things we don't ever get asked, and I say we, meaning we as a culture, I mean, we as in, you and I have been teachers in the public schools, right? What you don't get asked is what should education be for? Mm-hmm. What should education be for? And when you start to really ask it, well, then that becomes a very personal question because what education is for me is different than you, right? But what you said is right. We go with this cookie cutter mentality. And so what I always tell people is there's a vast difference between school and education. Education is a lifelong endeavor. It's a very personal endeavor. It's all about growth. School is a one-size-fits-all system designed for slavery. And I don't use that word lightly. Look, I think it is an enslavement factor. And if you look at why school looks the way it does now, and why it looked the same, really when you and I were going, and when our parents were going. That you start to see it was never meant for child development and to really build a strong, sovereign society. And so that's what we're trying to rectify. We're having young heroes individualize their education. They're setting their own academic goals. They're collaborating around real world projects and real world problems. They're taking on massive amounts of responsibility. They're connecting with other students that are different ages than them, like the real world requires. They're taking on responsibility on and off campus, internships, apprenticeships. They're starting businesses. We dive into the Socratic method of conversation and thinking, meaning we are not there as the adults to tell them what to think or when to think it. We are showing them how to think and how to articulate their thoughts and how to be okay with the fact that they're going to run into plenty of people who are going to think something different, and they can still have a solid relationship with that person. They can go, look, here's my evidence, here's yours. Now I understand you, you understand me. High five, we're still friends even though we disagree, right? We're tackling things. It's the antithesis of school, really, is what we're doing.
Sure.
It's funny. I have been in radio a long time, and the guy that I most admire in radio, the late Rush Limbaugh, used to always talk about his coming up. Now, he was a man, near 70, or I think in his 70s when he died. But I remember listening to him talking about going through school in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and calling it a prison that he just couldn't wait to get out of. Now, that's a man much older than I. Mm-hmm. And I didn't maybe feel that strongly about school, but in many days I dreaded it. What I loved was that I was lucky enough to be in a school that fostered my love of broadcasting, so I had fond memories of it. But we saw it in our own kids as we put our kids in public school. Our oldest thinks of school as a prison, and I think what I'm saying is that's now 3 generations. Right. And every one of them, I've thought to myself, well, that's just the way it's supposed to be. That's just the way it has to be. And no, it isn't. I mean, that's what I've learned through this experience. No, it is not. It does not have to be that way.
Correct. And not only that, here's one of the more dangerous things that we often don't stop to think about either. So I loved school. Why? Because I loved the social aspect. I loved the sports aspect. I loved, there was girls there, right? I mean, I loved school for all the wrong reasons. And I also understood the game very early, meaning I knew how to get good grades without trying. And so I did well in school. But when I left, I had no idea who I was. I had no idea what I had to offer the world. I had no direction. So that's one of the things we don't talk about is sometimes we've got a huge population of people who do really, really good at the game of school and realize that the game of school is not the same as the game of life, and they feel cheated there. So even if they didn't think they're now into it.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Matt, this is such an important point because I hear this too. We focus a lot on kids that don't like school or don't do well in school, but it's also important to point out there are kids that get 4.0s and are valedictorian, and then they leave school and they just flame out. They literally don't know how to function.
That's right. And they're miserable in the process, many of them too, right? So again, this is it's actually a larger issue than most people realize because we focus on the obvious issues, the woke agendas, all the different gender conformity and all these new social, we focus on some of these, and rightfully so. These are things that we need to speak out against. These are things we need to work against. But the more insidious, I think, villain is that long tail game of you go 12 years being taught how to be a good slave in a game that doesn't transfer directly to life. And that's hurting our young people.
That's a great analogy, I guess. I don't want to say analogy, but that is something that drew me initially several years ago when I started looking at just the option of homeschooling, which we don't do. But one of the things that I really liked about it was the fact that I was thinking about pulling my kids from a classroom, which does not at all represent a real life situation, but going to the post office, the grocery store, cooking, going to the park. Those were real life situations where they were going to be encountering things that a teacher didn't have ultimate authority and control over, that instead it was going to be life situations. And that is kind of where I started to sort of think to myself, this doesn't totally feel right. And sadly, it took us several years.
We also have to be honest. As we have a 17-year-old, almost 18, and a 16, almost 17-year-old. And while we're working diligently on this now to correct it, I think if we're to be honest, we have to confess, we're always sort of shocked at what they don't know when we'll walk into a store or a bank and they'll go, well, I don't know how do I do, and we're like, how do you not know? And that's on us. It's our fault, really. So we're trying to correct that, but that's the point.
I mean, but so again, we're talking about the difference between schooling and education. I mean, that's really, those are the conversations we are having. You're exactly right. The gains are not the same. And so it's, really and what I tell people is, look, you're born, it's not even always, you're born into the biggest cult mentality, the biggest cult religion in our country is school. Mm-hmm. So you are taught that this is the way it's supposed to look. And this is how you always, this is how everybody's always done it. And this must be what the experts have decided. And so when you go outside of that, you still have this cult mentality of like, but wait, aren't I supposed to do this? Because some expert said somewhere that in school they're supposed to do this. So, you've got this entire population that believes, they were born in a cage and they think flying is an illness, right? Getting outside the cage is an illness. So again, that is what we're combating.
So Acton Academy, if I could, I'm sorry to get back to this. You got 300 campuses. They all have sort of I know you said they're each tailored to the students. Are you talking about multiple students on multiple campuses? Are they small groups? And do they have kind of undergirding principles that they all share in terms of the way these kids are instructed?
Exactly. It's the principles that we all share, right? We'll talk about systems that we all share, that we utilize for individual sovereignty and growth and freedom. And we'll talk about individual projects that we have seen be beneficial, and we'll share those out. If one of my campuses developed a NASA project where we took 6 weeks for the young heroes to work together to solve kind of a problem. They were diving into NASA. They were creating rockets or something. So we put this together and go, look, here's what worked, here's what didn't, here's what they liked, here's what they didn't like. And then we share it with everybody, and everybody's got the autonomy to go, okay, I like that. And we'll go ahead and do that. We're going to modify that for us. Or they can say, no, you know what? We're not going to use that one. Our heroes wouldn't be interested. So we're just trying to create this tight-knit unit. But at the core of that is we believe every young hero is a genius that is on a path to find a calling to go out and change the world. So they need to have mass exposure to big concepts. They need to have mass exposure to massive responsibility early on. They need to learn to be self-directed. That is the most important component of this, and it's something that is stripped away in school. There's a sage on the stage that's going to tell you exactly what to do and when to do it. It's just like in prison. We're going to tell you exactly when you can speak. Gosh, you have to raise your hand to ask to go to the bathroom. We want to develop people who are autonomous, who are character-driven, who are doing the right thing because it's the right thing, and they are willing to direct their own futures. That's the only thing that works.
And Matt, is it also, are you talking about, is this a school where you're learning math and science and history too, or is it not the traditional kind of, what do you want to call it, entry-level general education stuff?
So what your definition of those is what we would need to tackle. So this is where, when you guys said, we only go about 20 minutes on the podcast, I'm like, yeah, well, good luck, because I can't even give you all the goods in 20. I'm like, I can't give you the goods in 20 minutes. So when we talk about science, what do you mean by that, right? What do most people? Most people mean, okay, well, if my kid has to regurgitate some academic facts about the fact that there's, 8 planets, if he gets to look in a microscope sometimes, well, I feel good. He's done science. Well, that's not science. What's science? Science is the scientific method, understanding, how to question things, understanding how to, put them under a microscope figuratively and to go, okay, I'm going to try this and I'm going to make a guess here and I'm going to see if that works. And then I'm going to go back to the drawing board. And so that's what we're talking about. When you're talking about math, we think, okay, well, academic, they've got to get through, trigonometry or calculus. How many people actually use calculus in the day-to-day life? What if I told you my daughter doesn't want to touch calculus or traditional math with a 10-foot pole, but she's 11 years old and she'll go through a profit and loss statement? She's run mock businesses. She's run real businesses where she's made $5,000 in a weekend. Isn't that math?
Yeah,
right.
Sure
100%.
is.
Can you get the traditional academia done at an Acton Academy? You absolutely can. We just don't pretend like that should be the focus.
And I don't mean to insult when I ask it. I'm just curious because, again, we're all in this framework of sort of what we understand as the traditional K through 12 model. Then you go on to college. So do higher education, facilities, universities, do they recognize Acton as every bit the same kind of education as your traditional K through 12?
So these are my favorite conversations. So you're never offending. I just get very animated, and because I love these conversations. So you're never going to offend me.
You come from academe, so you can speak to this too, right?
I speak to it very, very much from I've seen how the sausage is made, right? So which is why I tell people, like, hey, first of all, before we even start the college conversation, college is a net negative, I think, for more people than it's a positive. But that's a different conversation.
Agreed.
Okay. So I can prove it. But outside of that, actually we get into colleges easier than most people. so it's not even you have to understand the game of that you're playing with, and it is a game, very intentional game when you're applying to colleges. But our young heroes get in at a higher clip than anybody else, partially because we know the game, but partially because we're also helping them to be the naturally amazing, interesting people they are. And we can show that. It's not just a piece of paper that says you took this class and got this grade, which means you were obedient in this way and you got an A. You were obedient over here and you got an A. You regurgitated this and you got an A. We can show actual results of doing actual real work, and it makes it very easy to get into colleges.
So, Matt, I would ask then, we've interviewed a lot of homeschoolers. We've wandered into the homeschool realm through several interviews, and that's another facet of education we're not familiar with as parents. But are you more a close cousin to that model, do you think, than maybe any other? Or is that not accurate either?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of differences. And in the campuses that I launched to, I ran them actually as more like, quote unquote homeschool co-ops. And I help families all over the world with their home education. We've got a full tribe that we walk through that every single month as well. So I think it's very much aligned. What you can't replicate, in the home is the natural process of, okay, I have 30 young people who are organizing a studio. And when they're coming together around, we've got a signed contract, and then maybe we have one of these heroes who is distracting, and now we have to go through this whole process of how do we call them out? How do we have hard conversations with that other student? How do we put them on a performance improvement plan? How do we, ask them to leave and go through this whole due process system where we're having these you can't replicate that at home. So there's some value there that there's no way to replicate.
Okay. Well, I think that just the premise of it, I do feel like it sounds like that homeschooling model, but it's that unschooling piece too that I think is there when you talk about, you're not necessarily thinking of science, what the traditional people think of, or traditional parenting model think of as science. You're unschooling, you're undoing what's been done to create a better outcome, which is essentially a better life for these kids going through the educational system. You've kind of upended that, which I like a lot.
So if there are parents of young people listening, Matt, who are thinking, hey, this sounds pretty good. I'm interested in this, but I live in a part of the country where I don't know anything about Acton Academy. I've never heard of it. There's nothing close to me.
We don't have one out here.
We don't have one in our area. What would you recommend?
Yeah, if they don't have one in their area, but they think it sounds interesting, then I think there's two different ways they can go. One, they can take a look if they were serious about, no, this is it. Like, this would be my calling. I would say, go read Courage to Grow. It's a great book. Go down the Acton Academy YouTube and Google rabbit hole and see if it's something that is calling you. And if you're really like, hey, I want to launch one, go to actonacademy.org and take a look at what it would mean to try to apply to launch one. If you're really called to it, then get after it. It's one of the hardest, but also the most, one of the most rewarding things you can possibly do. Launching those. If that is something that you're like, look, I just want for my kids, my own young heroes, then really home education, I really believe is the way to go. Not homeschool, home education. Homeschool is, again, I'm bringing that cult mentality with me, right? I gotta do school at home. I gotta do subjects. No, we want to teach you how to educate at home. That's a vastly different thing. So those are the two routes I would go for any of the parents listening.
Let's shoot into Apogee Strong for a minute, which is a project that we're really interested in. We have two teenage sons ourselves, I guess just turned 18, almost 17 and 18. Here's one thing I just read recently as a stat, Matt. It was stunning to me. Something like 7.5 million young men, and however you define young, I would say certainly in their 20s, maybe early 30s, just aren't working. Presumably they're at home on devices or playing games. I don't want to sound like an old man on the porch, but it does seem like we're trending toward a society with a lot of apathetic, disengaged young men. Are you noticing that also? And it seems as though you want to tackle that, if so.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and it's statistically proven. It's not just, hey, and I do the same thing. I got a gray beard, and so people are like, okay, old guy, right? But the reality is, it is statistically provable that we are delaying adulthood. We are delaying young men taking on responsibility, and there are fewer and fewer kind of rites of passage to bring you into masculinity, to bring you into manhood. And that's what we were trying to combat. We were saying, hey, look, the term teenager didn't even exist until 1944. No, most people don't realize that, right? Before that, it was just, hey, congratulations, you're a young man. And that comes with all of the responsibilities of a young man. Let's start working. Let's start providing. Let's start helping. Let's start aiding others. Let's start leading others. Let's start doing things that men would do. We would start that a whole lot earlier. Well, now it's delayed more and more for multiple reasons. Some of it's parenting trends, some of it's education trends, some of it's cultural trends. And you're right, there's more distractions than ever before for young men too. So we are trending towards a perpetual childhood. And so this entire program is good men pouring into young men and giving them projects, challenges, and responsibilities to usher them into becoming character-driven, virtuous young men that we can count on.
And within your Apogee Strong, so when you talk about character-driven, you talk about virtuous, that does not necessarily for you mean a faith-based or approach, correct?
It doesn't have to be.
Or does it?
So we intentionally, we want them to understand who they are from a spiritual perspective, but we're going to take a very similar approach as like what I will do with Acton, right? So I've run Christian schools in the past, and then I ran Actons as non-faith-based. I can tell you unequivocally, we had more genuine faith-based conversations in non-faith-based programs. Because again, the tendency in the faith-based program is, and again, this is not knocking anybody running faith-based schools. It's not, but it is. Well, there's one right answer, and it doesn't matter what we say. As long as I say Jesus is the answer, we go, yep, cool, done, awesome. Well, I would rather tackle it from let's test each other. Let's use the Socratic method and go, why? What about this? What about this that we don't talk about? What about this here? What about understanding somebody else's faith? What is their evidence? Why do you believe what you believe? Is it because your parents told you to believe it, or because the pastor told you, or because you dove in and you get it? You've owned it. We want these young men to own their faith, and so that doesn't happen if you don't test it and push it.
Sure.
Yeah, which actually being a good Christian, requires questioning, I think, and that's certainly what we talk to our kids about.
And learning to defend it, that's one thing.
It's also biblical. Work is biblical. Providing is biblical. And if you're, at least if you're a believer and a Christian anyway, what you're talking about with young men, it is biblical.
So how is this? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm cutting off. We have a delay. I'm sorry. I was curious, how is it set up then? How does this program, your Apogee Strong, how does it work? I've been on the website and I've looked around through it, but I'm curious if you could explain a little bit of how it is set up for people.
Yeah, you bet. So we've got young men from all over the world, multiple countries. And the way we do this is when they sign up, they come in, they get a series of onboarding videos that say, look, here's kind of the way this whole program is going to work. First and foremost, though, here is the code. Here's the Apogee code. It is kind of this Bushido code, so to speak, of honor and virtue. And this is, the integrity that you are saying that you are going to live by. And if there's evidence of, walking away from that, look, we're not going to play those games. So these young men sign that code and they jump in. And what happens is every month for 12 months, they get a new real world project, challenge, series of workouts, recommended readings to take on for the month. So it's real education. It's not school based. It's real education. They're having to go, serve. They're having to go lead. They got projects around, giving speeches, interviewing local law enforcement, interviewing CEOs, going out and serving in all different capacities, as well as some interesting and kind of unique challenges to broaden their abilities in some other ways. So they're getting these every single month. They're interacting on a private platform daily, where myself and other mentors are putting out videos and articles and things for them to consider. And we're having conversations with these young men daily. And all the parents are on that platform too, so they can all see exactly what's going on. There's nothing hidden. And then every week, we get together on one large virtual call where we will bring in the best of the best of the best. And what I mean by that is we'll bring in mentors. One week it may be a professional athlete. The next week may be a billionaire CEO. And then we might go to an actor. We might go to a musician. We might go to, somebody nobody's ever heard of. But the through line for all these mentors they are good men who are character driven and who are out, living a life in service to other people. And so we'll have these men that come in and speak to them every single week, and that they'll challenge them as well. And then we will also get together physically as much as humanly possible, but at least one big event per year to come together and break bread and celebrate graduates. So these young men are getting exposed day in and day out to good men who are challenging them to rise to the occasion. And what they're doing is just spectacular.
And Apogee Strong, Matt, is separate from Acton, just to be clear. And this is a mentorship program. How long does it run? Is it several weeks? And there's a beginning, middle, end, kind of a completion, if you want to say graduation, if you will, from the program?
Correct. It's 12 months. And that's what people go, oh, gosh, young men can't commit to. Yes, they can. Yes, they can. They can do it for 12 months. And they
should be expected to figure out how to make that commitment, too. I think that's when I was listening to you and I thought, right, because that's the one thing I see in my kids. And, again, where we're always analyzing where we've done well and not so well as parents, that there's that tendency, the lack of grit that I see. Sometimes they seem to have it in some ways and others they don't. And so just the fact that you've got this year-long sign a contract, I just feel like they don't always even know what that means anymore.
They don't. And commitment isn't a word. Culturally, commitment is something that we don't, as a culture believe in anymore, right? And that's nonsense. They come on for 12 months, and then what happens is, yes, we have a large graduation event, and then these young men at the end of that 12 months, they're invited. If they've poured into themselves, they are invited to stay on in this program in perpetuity at no charge. This is a mission. So we've got young men that have been with us for far more than 12 months. And by the way, as we're building out this organization of Apogee, these are the young men that we're also hiring. These are the young men that when other CEOs are coming to us going, hey, do you have any good young people? We go, yeah, we've got to introduce you to so-and-so. And so they're getting jobs. They're going into, they're getting into colleges. They're getting opportunities because of their commitment to this leadership. There's a whole lot of lights at the end of this tunnel.
I love the fact that it's led by men. I'm assuming when you're talking about bringing in speakers, you're talking about being led by men. I think men's ministries through church, men's programs like this, they are far and few between. Like, they just don't exist like this. And so while my initial inclination is to say, oh gosh, but it's online, I still think, so what? Because you're still creating that community that needs to exist in order for our boys to learn beyond just what's in their homes, to go further and farther. I just think that male role model, saying that it's okay to be a man, it's okay to be hardworking, it's okay to provide for somebody, it's okay to commit. I think those are just values that need to be exemplified.
Yes, you're exactly. And here's a roadmap of how you can, get down. What we tell these guys is follow this roadmap. And it's not because it's the most perfect roadmap ever, right? It's because it is a really good roadmap that is going to open up tons of doors, but it's also going to equip you to build your own roadmap at that point, right? To take control of your own life and to go lead others in service to them, to go be that protector, provider, presider. We've got men who are laying this out before you. It's a 12-month rite of passage where you now know what that looks like. That's so important.
I'm really intrigued by that. I was telling Chris ahead of time when I was sharing this information about you that I really specifically like that it does focus on these ages of this 12 to 22. I think there is so much that goes into littler boys, teaching, working with them. But when we get especially this generation of 12 to 22-year-olds, 12 to 25-year-olds, I just feel like there's a lot that has been lost and missing. And I can't I can't be more, I guess, outwardly supportive of something like this, because our boys have come through school systems. A lot of boys around them have come through systems where it's heavily female, where they're told to sit down, shut up, be quiet, where they're told to just
take a pill,
take a pill, figure it out, and not actually come to the point where they have skills and knowledge and the desire to do more and be more and embrace who they are as young adults, as young men.
That's right. That's exactly it. There's this DNA inside of us. God put that inside of young men where they want the adventure. They want to go, slay the dragon. They want to go rescue the princess. They want to go, they want to take action. That is in us. That's not an accident. And that is not something to be subdued. It's something to be directed, because obviously that can go sideways as well.
Sure.
But you get it directed by other good men who have learned how to direct it. And that is it. You don't tone down the masculinity. You tone down the direction in which the masculinity is focused, and you do it in a service minded, character driven fashion. And it allows the world to be changed through these young men. You're exactly right.
So, Matt, I'm certain that there are people listening to this that are excited and inspired and curious about it all. You mentioned a little bit about Acton. Talk about Apogee Strong. How do people reach out, get involved, find out more?
So they can head to apogeestrong.com. If you've got questions, shoot me an email directly, matt@apogeestrong.com. Glad to take any and all questions and help. And if it's not going to be right for you, I'm glad to point you in a direction that is. So you can reach out to me directly there, or check out apogeestrong.com and get a little bit more info.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, we were very, very intrigued when we got our email from John about you, and this proved to be everything that we hoped it would be. Fascinating and interesting, and I hope for people that have young men in their lives, and maybe, like us, who from time to time feel like they run into roadblocks with the young men in their lives, this may be a real avenue. So thank you for your time today, Matt.
No, pleasure is mine. Thank you for allowing me to have a voice, and thank you for doing what you all do, too.
Absolutely. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So many thoughts going through my mind as we were talking to him, specifically just remembering back to the differences in the teachers that our boys had. I mean, I know we've talked a lot about our daughter through a lot of the previous episodes, and we probably will continue to do so, but the boy piece of knowing, sadly, that we had some teachers that didn't maybe enjoy that boy mentality, the moving, when he talked about the moving and the saving and that adventuresome spirit, I think that's why Boy Scouts was a good draw for one of our kids, because he got to get outside and it was okay to shoot a gun. It was okay to chop some wood.
Yeah, I don't want to say that this is wrong for everyone, but how many boys have we heard? How many parents over the years have we heard say about their boys, well, he's just so hyperactive.
Right.
And then we got him on the medicine, and now he's better. And I think to myself now, again, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not suggesting you're a bad parent or something. No. I just wonder if for so many years that's been the attitude with our young men. Medicate them because they won't sit still. Medicate them because they won't focus. Maybe it's just because they're boys. Well,
and we've talked, I think I mentioned it when we were talking with him, and we've talked about it too. When we are talking with people where there is maybe a necessary space for medicine, the other big component is skills. And so this Apogee Strong program that he's been talking about, that is a place for skills. And I think when you have some of those skills in place, that is not to say anything isn't true about a chemical makeup. I understand all that. But I think when we have skills in place, connections in place, we have actual leadership provided by males, I think that's a big, big component.
Listen, I'll only speak for myself when I say I was exposed to in high school, I remember meeting and seeing people doing the career I wanted to do. And I got more excited and more enthused and just hungered to be around that as a kid more than any. And I had great teachers. But I mean, my memories of my schooling, my passion was broadcasting. And anytime I was allowed to do that or be near it, I couldn't wait to get out of bed every day. Now, I'm just an example. And I know not every kid's the same, but I imagine that every kid who has a passion and a love for something, carpentry or mechanical work or building cars or whatever, science, allow them to see others doing that, particularly young men seeing other men doing that. interning. It just seems to me that maybe that's what's missing instead of that kind of classroom setting. Maybe it's more...
that's kind of the premise too with the Acton schools. That's a piece of. Well, it's actually a big component of it is that you're putting together these projects and these things that are not just for the grade. They actually serve a longer term purpose. Yep. And we know that. We've seen that. We've talked about that with our own kids, but I think finding those opportunities that allow for that for that to happen in that space and in a supported space is a big deal.
So John, John from Westchester, thank you so much. Westchester, PA, a listener of the show. Thanks for the recommendation to Matt that made it for a whole show.
And what a cool, I think it's just a good way to kind of kick it off that we've got all these different ways, all these different avenues to explore. So I think this was fun. If
you have a suggestion for a show in 2023, maybe there's somebody out there like Matt who you think we ought to talk to, please let us know. There's lots of ways to reach out. I hope, by the way, you before you give them that information, I hope you'll leave a comment on the show. If you're an Apple iTunes user or if you're a Spotify user, leave a 5-star review and a written review. You can do that at Apple iTunes by scrolling all the way to the bottom of the menu of shows, and that's where you leave the written review and the 5 stars. Spotify's a little easier. Just leave the 5 stars. But we always appreciate that you subscribe, rate this show, and leave a comment. Now, if you want to reach out to us,
then you can go ahead and send us an email at hello@makingtheleappodcast.com. We are on Instagram. We are on Facebook. We are on Twitter at Making the Leap Podcast. Those are the best ways to go ahead and contact us. But we're reading the emails. We're looking through the comments. We're generating ideas. We've had a lot of people reaching out and sharing some different avenues to go down. I actually just had an email today with some more people to start contacting. So great. I think we're ready to rock and roll this year, and we're so glad you're along for the ride with us.
Off to the races for 2023. Thanks for being with us again, and we'll see you next week right here.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. Please rate and comment on the show, as well as subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'll see you next time on Making the Leap.